I think the Trump legacy for the Republicans is going to be long-term damage to that brand for all those spineless, lack of moral compass leaders who fail to object or reject many of the outrageous things that Trump said over the last 4 years.
That's Daniel Wagner, and this is a post-US election episode of the All Things Risk podcast. Welcome and welcome back to the All Things Risk podcast. I'm Ben Catania, your host, and around here we go long form, using the lenses of risk and uncertainty to understand ourselves and our world a little bit better. This is a special post-US election episode of the show. After a long campaign and indeed a very long 4 years, the results are in, and Joe Biden is set to be the 46th president of the United States. And I say that with a huge sense of relief. But what does that mean? Well, to answer that question, we welcome back Daniel Wagner to the show. We've had Daniel on several times now. He's the CEO of Country Risk Solutions and a world-renowned expert on geopolitics. So let's dive right in and talk about what a Biden presidency means to the US and the world. Let's discuss Trump's legacy and Trumpism. Let's consider COVID-19 and much, much more. Here is Daniel Wagner. Daniel, welcome back to the All Things Risk podcast. This is our post-2020 presidential election edition. Welcome.
Thanks. I hope I'm ready for this, Ben.
I hope we all are. So the results are in, and it looks like we've got a Biden presidency, and that raises all sorts of interesting questions. And I thought maybe we could use this time to maybe take a step back and talk about what a Biden presidency means. Also, what we've maybe a bit of a retrospective on what we have had in the United States and around the world over the last 4 years, and what that means, what the legacy of the Trump presidency is, and what all that could portend with regard to the coming 4 years, because let's face it, and maybe we can start here, the factors that led to the rise of Donald Trump, even though he was not successful in his re-election bid, those factors are still there in many ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let me just say at the outset, I'm relieved, as I'm sure billions of people around the world are relieved, that this man will soon be packing. As you know, in America, the partisanship has never been worse. And I find myself wondering, was there ever a bipartisan era? And then I remember, oh yeah, just a generation ago there was. Democrats and Republicans could reach across the aisle and they could get stuff done. And they remembered while they were there and their allegiances to the people rather than to the donors and the lobbyists and the special interests. I mean, I almost don't recognize the political landscape of America now, and I certainly don't like what it's become. And I'm sure a lot of people around the world feel that way. That said, there's a lot of legacy issues that are built into the American political system and have been percolating for quite some time. Let me put it this way. I think both the Democratic and Republican parties have what I would call a recessive gene, meaning for the Democrats, they have the loony left. For the Republicans, they have the religious right. And what's happened, of course, is that this has been percolating over decades to what we have now. So this is, regrettably, an accurate reflection of what American society has turned into. And, I think there are a lot of people in the country who are really, really unhappy with it, but there are plenty who are quite satisfied with this, that the battle lines are drawn and that, you've got these people on this side and that people on that side, and that's just the way it is. And so we've descended into what seems to be a permanent slugfest. I mean, that really wasn't what the framers had in mind. The framers had something very different in mind, but then, of course, they didn't envision that there would be, a cyber world and AI and social media and all this stuff which has contributed to the situation that we've got today.
Mm-hmm. And One of the things about Donald Trump that is quite fascinating, very special, I think. Look, it takes a pretty special kind of incompetence to bankrupt a casino, and yet this man, did exactly that. And if you think about COVID-19, and if you were a very competent authoritarian, this would have been a great opportunity for a competent authoritarian to do loads of things that Donald Trump didn't do, and he failed miserably with regard to COVID-19. But I'm just wondering if, just the counterfactual here, if we didn't have COVID-19, or if it was much more subdued, do you think that Biden would have won?
Yeah, so great question, really. Plenty to ponder there. Let me just start by saying that I think in Trump's own mind, he probably saw himself as the greatest authoritarian that has ever lived, although he would never call himself that in public. Many of us in America even wonder how it's possible that we could have, traveled down this road at all. And I think that's one of the questions that will remain unanswered and pondered for years, if not decades to come, how we even got here. Now, regarding COVID, if it hadn't happened, would Trump be president? I think he probably would. And I think that I'm philosophical about this stuff. I think there's a reason why this may have happened at this time. Let's forget the conspiracy theories that this was all done on purpose, cooked in a lab in China, the conspiracy theorists would say, and released at a specific time to have its desired outcome. I mean, will we ever know whether that's true or not? We won't. Most people don't think that is the case, but whatever. If COVID hadn't come, the economy would have rumbled along in record fashion. And since most people vote their pocketbooks, they really wouldn't have necessarily cared about everything else. They would have been inward looking and say, well, are we better off as a country economically than we were before? Yes, the answer would be for most people to say yes. What about our foreign relations? Well, they're just a red hot mess, but most people don't know the difference. They don't know the difference between Austria and Australia. So what are they going to know about the JCPOA, right? Mm-hmm. And the environmentalists are going to say, well, okay, so this has also been a terrible thing. But on the other hand, the people in the oil and gas industry are going to say things have never been better. So I guess that Biden would have lost. Probably it wouldn't have been a terrible loss. It just would have been a loss based on where the battle lines, the electoral battle lines have been drawn. So no matter what Trump did or didn't do, does or doesn't do, he's got his 43 to 45% of the electorate, which is astounding in its own right, given everything that we know 4 years later about this man. I mean, most people would argue we knew a lot about everything we knew, everything we needed to know about this man, 6 months before the 2016 election. But now, certainly we do. And it's just astonishing to me that 45% of my countrymen don't care about all that stuff. I actually sort of am one of those people who ask myself the question, well, do I really want to stay here in Trump land for another 4 years? And do I really want to necessarily then go back to the country that will be in its aftermath? There are so many people who I know who literally just want to move to Canada or New Zealand or, some desert island somewhere. We've all had it up to here to begin with. This may have been the greatest thing ever for the American media, the fact that he became a political figure. But I mean, for the rest of us who now don't even listen to the news and can't stand all the dialectic, it's just intolerable.
Mm-hmm. Well, being a Canadian, and I am in Canada as we record this, and I can see the United States from my house. The border's closed, right? So there's no one able to get in, and we get this every 4 years. Every 4 years, you get a bunch of Americans saying we want to move to Canada because of what's going on. So there's a little bit of history repeating here. But at the same time, I guess what you're saying is this was less of a vote for Biden and a vote against Trump. And in presidential elections, as far as I'm aware, there's a huge amount of advantage to being the incumbent, but one that Trump squandered. So do you see it that way, that this was a vote against Trump rather than the vision that Joe Biden outlined?
You mean if you're on the Democratic side of the ledger, right? Because for the Trump folks, this is definitely a vote for Trump and Trumpism. For the Democrats, I do agree that there's less general enthusiasm for Biden per se than the vision that he represents. Mm-hmm. And that is one of moderation, sanity, conventionalism in foreign policy, etc. Even plenty of the people that I know in the Democratic arena are saying they're very, very skeptical about, tax increases and some of the things that Democrats are typically known for, bigger government, et cetera. I'm not sure that how much of that is ultimately going to be true. Biden has said, for example, that he's going to limit any tax increases to people who are truly wealthy. And I believe him on that front. And so I don't find myself, and I'm an independent, by the way, although I lean Democratic on some issues and Republican on others. Interestingly enough, I'm sort of a political enigma in that regard. And nobody's pandering for my vote because they have no idea who I'm going to vote for. Mm-hmm. But I won't be voting I didn't vote for Trump. Let me just put it that way. Mm-hmm. But I find myself in the camp of not voting for a candidate, but having to vote against a candidate virtually in every presidential election that I've ever participated in America. I have failed to be truly fired up and enthusiastic about almost any candidate who's ever become, the nominee for the party. I'm just not finding what it is that I'm looking for. Part of the problem is that so many of them are conventional, traditional politicians. And I think there's a lot of us out there who are looking for dishonesty. One of the things I like about Trump, actually, is that he basically said we don't have time for political correctness, and I'm not going to be taking the typical political line and pandering to both sides. He says what he thinks. Love that. So he doesn't pander to political interests. He doesn't care what anybody particularly thinks. I like that, and I wish most politicians were like that, because then I think more and more people would be actually fired up and enthusiastic. What we've got in Biden is, a very traditional politician. He's been at this game for 50 years, and it's hard to get the idea of getting truly enthusiastic and fired up by a 78-year-old to begin with. Although, in fairness, Bernie Sanders was completely contrary to that notion, right? I mean, he fired all sorts of people up, including a lot of younger folks, and he's in the 70-something category as well. So, but Biden certainly is not. And sure, that's okay. I'll take a steady pair of hands at this point.
And that's an interesting observation, is around Biden. And the question I have in my mind is, does this represent a view by Americans to just press pause on the divisiveness, and just because of everything that's been going on, to just have a more restrained form of governance for the next 4 years, as opposed to some type of shift? And whether or not if we are just seeing a pause, what comes back down the road?
Yeah, I wish I could say we're going to simply see a pause between what things used to be and what they have morphed into. I don't necessarily believe that. I think, unfortunately, Americans have been conditioned, particularly over the last 4 years, to be partisan and to take the gloves off and to have a slugfest, and to either dig into politics at the Thanksgiving dinner table or to completely avoid it. I've heard so many stories, although this hasn't happened to me, of friendships that have ended over multi-decades over Trump and versus anything else. Family feuds never ending, et cetera. I mean, what a sad state of affairs that you can't talk about politics with your family, much less your friends. I mean, it's just sad. It's just sad. It's pathetic, actually.
Well, this is, I think going back to the legacy of Trump, this is, I think, one of the unfortunate legacies. I fully concur with you about having someone who speaks their mind. In fact, in a recent cab ride I had here in Canada, actually, the cab driver, who happened to be a Libyan refugee 19 years ago, drives a cab in Canada, and said to me, we were talking about Donald Trump. This was the day that he got COVID, and he said, I hate Trump, he's an asshole. But I love Trump because he speaks his mind. And there are a lot of people, around the world actually, who want to have politicians be more authentic and speak their minds. Unfortunately for the United States, the one they happened to get was Donald Trump. But there is a desire for more authenticity in leadership.
Certainly, there's a common phrase that's used, that you get the politician or the leader that you deserve. And I have to say, if this had turned out differently, and if Trump had won, we would have deserved to have him for a second term. I think most people around the world realize that most Americans, certainly, the majority who are voting, did not vote for Trump the first or the second time. Mm-hmm. And that being the case, the majority of Americans do not want his bill of goods. And I think most people around the world realize that. That said, I must say, I get so tired of having to apologize for being American when I travel overseas. And I get so tired of saying I didn't vote for the guy, don't blame me, right? That all said, maybe it's also worth thinking about some of the changes in the foreign policy landscape that have resulted over the last 4 years. And, unfortunately for America, that damage has been done. And I think even many of our most stalwart allies are going to wonder if, a treaty that we have is worth the paper that it's printed on, and if promises that we make are actually going to be followed through, et cetera, et cetera. And we deserve to have that. How many treaties can you tear up in a single presidential term, right, for seemingly, non-justifiable reasons? I think that enduring legacy is going to permanently damage America's statecraft, unfortunately. And, of course, that will greatly be to the advantage of China and other actors in the international arena. China has played this whole thing brilliantly. And, of course, typically what China does is it sort of sits back and watches the landscape and sees how things develop. And then, at just the right moment, it'll hop in, or it will, pour on some gas in a particular arena, at a very opportunistic time to maximize its benefits. That's no crime. All states do that kind of thing. And I know this isn't a show about China this time, but we've talked about China enough for you to know that I actually admire their statecraft in that regard. And I think the U.S. and the West and the rest of the world can actually learn a lot from them. I actually just wrote a piece that was talking about how the world could learn so much about what China ended up doing in terms of COVID management. And that stands in such contrast to what America has not done. So one of the things that I really hope is going to change in the Biden era is that we will finally see some sort of sanity and universal approach to managing this terrible disease. And if China and Singapore and South Korea and other nations around the world can do it, well, why can't the U.S.? And this brings up another issue, of course, which is, where's the limit on partisanship? How are we going to get from a division in America where you have the people who say you must wear a mask anytime you go outside versus the people say, I'm not, it's my freedom of choice not to, and you can't make me? It's going to be ugly if there's a universal program in that regard, because there are going to be a lot of people who aren't going to abide by it, and who knows how that's ultimately going to be managed.
Sure. Well, maybe this is a good time to talk about the policy questions facing the Biden administration. And maybe we could start with COVID-19 and what Joe Biden and his team need to do. You mentioned the mask regulations. Well, what happens when we get a vaccine as well? You've got a huge amount of anti-vaxxers dotted around the United States. I don't know if anyone's ever done a study around proportion of anti-vaxxers in the US versus elsewhere, but I have to believe it's quite high as a percentage of population, which already means it's quite high from the point of view of absolute numbers, all kinds of things, right?
I would agree with that, Ben. It's a real issue. And my view is that I don't think that even if there is a fully approved vaccine at the end of this year, I don't think it's necessarily going to make much difference. Most of those are going to go to first responders and the elite and the powerful. And then the people on down the line, the 99% others who didn't get it, they're just going to have to be waiting for months or possibly even years, even if they want it, because the ability to produce billions of doses for everybody on the planet, I mean, it's never been done before, to my knowledge. And then how do you get it to everyone? How do you force people to take it if they don't want to take it? Even the best vaccine, my understanding is it's got 50 to 70% effectiveness. And that means that you're always going to have 30 to 50% who either didn't get it or it doesn't work for them. And then where does that get us?
Right. So what does Joe Biden need to do around COVID over the next few months, starting in January when he officially takes over?
Well, I'll tell you what, if it was me and I was Joe Biden, I would actually follow the Chinese, Singapore, South Korea model, which involves, mandatory testing of everyone, mandatory quarantines. And that doesn't last forever. I think that's something that people are forgetting. If we actually do it right, and you get 90% of the people to do this, whether you force them to do it or not. And of course, in the Chinas and Singapores and South Koreas of the world, they were forced to do it. But then there's also a difference there that they didn't have so much of a problem with the enforcement because most people understood that this needed to be done. As a result of that, in China today, we have, people, whole cities, much of the country, be able to walk around without a mask. And when they have a single infection or a small cluster, they shut down the entire city that it applies to. They test everyone and they nip it in the bud, which shows that this can be done. So if I was him, I would actually risk for the greater good being called an authoritarian and put in force martial law or something, which is what it's going to take, in my view, probably to get this thing under control in America, and just bite the bullet for 1 to 3 months or whatever it takes and just get it done. Yes, it will be painful, but my God, how can we keep going on doing what we're doing? It's just such an incredible mess. What do I think he's actually going to do? I think it's going to be some sort of a hybrid. I do think that he's going to take some power away from the states. He will get some congressional mandate to basically say, yes, here's what the plan is, and yes, this is what we want to do. And if you do have then the clean sweep in the House and the Senate and the presidency, well, then you can do that sort of thing. And if you don't, then it becomes much more difficult.
Right. Could we talk a little bit about foreign policy and what a Biden presidency may mean for the rest of the world? What should the rest of the world expect to see?
Yeah, so this is much easier to answer, I think. I think the rest of the world knows what to expect from Biden because of what was done in the Obama presidency. This was, at the end of the day, from a foreign policy perspective, pretty conventional. There weren't too many surprises. I mean, there were occasional surprises, but most of the time, it was a middle-of-the-road endeavor. A lot of people say that in foreign policy, Obama ended up looking a lot like the Bush presidency that preceded him. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Biden presidency pretty much mirrored the Obama playbook in foreign policy. That's good news. Should that happen, that's really good news for the rest of the world. That means that we reinstill strong relations with our strongest allies, that we steady the ship, that we take a middle ground course, and that countries can start to rely on America again and know what to expect. If that happens, in my view, Ben, that's a great victory. Because from where we're coming, with this sort of rudderless foreign policy and very erratic and very extreme in some cases, to just middle of the road, that sounds just fine to me.
Okay, yeah. I'm comforted at your how you describe that, which, to be honest, when we speak, I'm not always comforted by the things that you say. But, we never know. And one of the areas that we've talked extensively about is China. And do you think Biden continues the more aggressive stance towards China that the Trump administration took?
Yes, in that regard, I think that ship has sailed. I think the American people and the American Congress, they pretty much have a more realistic view of what China is and is not. China is not changing its stripes anytime soon. And that being the case, it seems to me that with some tweaks, there's probably not too much reason for America to change too much about its approach to China. Because at the end of the day, the road that Trump started America down on this front, it's only partially there, right? I mean, you have this phase one trade agreement, which isn't really going to be fully implemented because the goals are completely unrealistic to begin with. And then basically the Chinese said, well, we're not actually going to continue negotiating with America until after the election. Now, if Trump had won, I'm not sure that they would necessarily be going to the negotiating table anytime soon. But with Biden there, I think they at least have an incentive to test the waters and see what this new guy actually is all about in the China arena. I'm not sure too much is going to change in the longer term. I think, and I've written this in the recent past, I think what would be great is if both countries could simply say, this isn't good for either one of us, and we need to find a way to break the logjam. And if both of them compromise a little bit, they can hopefully head down a more conciliatory path. If that happens over the next 4 years, I think that would also be a great victory from where we are again today. Let's also not forget that Trump has been, in many ways, a gift to China that's contrary to a lot of conventional wisdom in terms of, they've had such a rough time, et cetera. This has forced China, this whole trade war and messiness, has forced China to reevaluate, its long-term plans and become more self-reliant. And Xi just said that recently in a new national forum in the last week or so. He basically just said, hey, we're going to be more self-reliant. It's all about economic growth and military might. And they have the ability to do all of that. So that's exactly what I'm expecting from them.
It's going to be fascinating to see how that relationship evolves over the coming 4 years. Absolutely. What about other areas? And one of the things that I've seen in terms of, election adverts from the Trump camp, a couple of things over here in this part of Canada. I get television from the United States, from Michigan. And so all of the adverts, many of the adverts talked about Trump's devotion to the working class and how Joe Biden was involved in outsourcing jobs to China. And the other thing that Trumpists have claimed or laid lots of claim to is, no wars, no minimal foreign entanglements. Are we likely to see a more hawkish stance by the Biden camp, by the Biden administration in foreign policy? Or do you think that ship has also sailed?
I can't imagine that it's going to be more hawkish than it's been over the last 4 years. But by the same token, I don't think that anyone who knows Biden would consider him a wimp. I just think if you're comparing him to Trump, he might look like a wimp. That doesn't mean he's a wimp. It just means he's not, on the extreme in foreign policy. There's a lot of truth to some of the things that Trump has been saying. There's a lot of truth to what both candidates have been saying about the other, of course. But Biden, does have his weaknesses. He does have some vulnerabilities vis-a-vis his son and some of the votes he's taken in the past and some of the positions he's had. What politician who's been at this game for 50 years wouldn't? That all said, I mean, if America could vote in a guy with the kind of warts that Trump had, they can certainly vote in a guy with the kind of warts that Biden has. And I think moderation is going to be the key in most everything that Biden does. He doesn't want to end up being labeled as an extremist from the left. And of course, that's one of the big issues in this campaign is how much he has integrated or not integrated the platform of the left in what it is that he said he's going to do. He's been forced to do some of that stuff because he wants to keep party unity. I don't necessarily think he's going to be doing everything that the left wants him to do. And that also is something that I don't want to see. I reject extremism on the left or the right. And I think the vast majority of voters in this country actually are more moderates, and they just veer toward one direction or the other. Another thing that I really hope may happen, and I'm not sure that it will, is that if ever there was an argument in favor of having an independent political platform in America, it's now, right? 45% of the American voting public is actually independent. They gravitate to the Democrats or Republicans because they've got nowhere else to go. There is a movement, more than one actually, in America designed to establish an independent political platform, but it's just brushed aside like so many other similar initiatives in the past. But boy, do we need it.
There's a lot of the truth in what you say there. The choices seem very limited. And I chuckle when I hear Americans, for example, use the word, socialism and socialist to label somebody like Joe Biden, because if you've not lived in a country that has real socialists, you don't know what socialism actually is. And same with these other labels of fascist and all the rest of it. The political choices in the United States tend to be the real political choices tend to be quite narrow ideologically. The ones that are on offer, even though the wings of the parties voices the noise tends to be quite ideological and partisan. At least that's how I viewed it. You look at somebody like Bernie Sanders, who makes lots of waves but can't get the nomination, and so he's not a viable choice come every 4 years in November.
Right. He's tried that twice. He's not going to try a third time. In fairness to Bernie, I mean, Bernie is a democratic socialist. So,
right. Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is different than a socialist. And that's the thing. The average voter in America, they hear that S word and they just start freaking out. And they don't understand that there are shades of gray in there. And they don't understand also that, Social Security and Medicare, those are forms of democratic socialism. Excuse me, and everybody is drinking that Kool-Aid. So I don't understand what the big deal is. I think the biggest deal in that regard is that a lot of people just feel that their freedom of choice is going to be taken away if you go down that road. And as long as freedom of choice is maintained in some capacity, then they don't have to worry about it. But on the other hand, if you're going to have socialized healthcare, everybody has to participate in it. That's why it works in a place like Canada and the UK. Everybody participates in it. There is no choice. Now, if everybody's participating in it, then choice becomes less of an issue because everybody's being treated equally. The issue that I have with Obamacare is that while much of it is a good idea, and of course there are too many people who don't have proper health care, which is unacceptable as well, what ends up happening, since not everybody participates, is that the wealthy and the people who do participate end up subsidizing those who don't. And that's an issue. So I actually would be in favor of universal health care in that regard, because here again, health care is completely out of control in America. It's by far the most expensive. Just crazy, the amount of money that we pay for drugs and for an office visit to a doctor, et cetera. Something has to change in that regard. So we'll see what happens.
Sure. It's insane. Again, if you live in the UK or in a country like Canada, and then we both lived a bit in the Philippines where there's there's nothing. And if someone's of a lower economic strata and has a major health crisis, life savings go, all types of things go, and it does put a a huge damper on economic growth because people's economic opportunities are all of a sudden become limited by one, for instance, unfortunate health event in their lives. And the same can be said for, subsidized education and all those things that if you come from a country that has a lot of that, you do take it for granted. And if you've not experienced living in a place like that, as most Americans have had, I suppose it's easy to dismiss it.
It certainly is. There are so many things that I would like to see changed about how business is done in America. But at the most fundamental level, Ben, I would really like to see fundamental change in how America is governed at the national level. If I had my way, I would remove everybody in Congress and replace them with a single 6-year term for both congressmen and women and senators. And what that would effectively do is remove the role of special interests and lobbyists. They wouldn't have to spend 80 or 90% of their time raising money and pandering to these people. And they could instead remember who sent them there and why they're there, what they're supposed to be doing. And maybe then we could actually get something done in Congress. These career politicians who've been there for decades, who go election after election, just sliding in and relying on those old relationships and all the money that's sloshing around in their campaigns. I mean, it just reeks to high heaven. I think something radical has to change in America for that to happen. I don't understand, for example, why does America still vote on the first Tuesday in November? That was done when we were an agricultural society for some strange reason. Why do we still have 2 senators for Rhode Island and Delaware and 2 senators for California and Texas? That's not representative of the population. Something gets lost in translation there. How many North and South Dakotas can you fit in population inside California? It's just shocking, right? So, there's a big, long list of things that if I were Biden, I would like to change. And, if you have the legislative mandate to be able to do that stuff, it would take a lot of courage to do it. But I'm guessing that whoever that person is that's courageous enough to do it would find a lot of support in a lot of quarters.
Well, I think this goes back to your comment about inspirational leadership. And as much as I prefer Joe Biden to Donald Trump several thousand times over, he's not, an inspirational leader. I don't put him in that camp where, real transformation can occur. Although we don't know. This might be an interesting time. I have heard other commentators saying that this could be a transformational presidency in many ways because of the deal making, and maybe there's that sort of legacy of the divisiveness and all kinds of things that you talked about reaching across the aisle. In terms of the vision, I don't think Biden has laid that out, but there might be some considerable upside here.
I would like to believe that, honestly, Ben. I'm not sure it's true with him per se, and with Kamala Harris, should she, ascend to the presidency either in the first or second term, I guess that's an open question, who knows. But I find that a little hard to imagine, given that Biden himself has for 50 years has had his own nose in the trough, right? How did he get reelected all those times? The same business. What state does he come from? Delaware, right? Nothing against Delaware, but my God, it's one of the smallest states. It's got a tiny population and 2 senators. So I hope that contention is right. It has to come from somewhere. I'm also hoping, to be perfectly honest, that there will come a point in time when octogenarians are not running either party. Those folks have had their nose in the trough for a long time as well. And you see where it's gotten us. On one hand, you could say it's a steady pair of hands. We know what we're getting, et cetera. Great experience. Okay, I buy that. But on the other hand, it's just more business as usual, and we can't afford it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Biden serves the beyond 4 years? Do you think he stands for re-election in 4 years?
Should he be vertical? should his mind still be there? I have no doubt that he would like to try. But I think everybody's noticed that from both a mental acuity and a physical agility perspective, he's not the strongest guy standing in every respect. I think the Democratic Party coalesced around him because he stands for stability and moderation and reliability, et cetera. And in a time of crisis, and that's where I think we are, that's exactly why he ended up getting the prize of the nomination, because that stalwart predictability is what people wanted. I still marvel at the idea that there could have been 25 candidates, some of them, as young as Pete Buttigieg, and ultimately very progressive, and the occasional business person and the occasional stargazer. All these folks who were in there, and then at the end of the day, this very unlikely guy, based on the early results, ends up taking the whole prize. So you just never know.
I do want to just go back to the question of Trump and Trumpism. Actually, this is more a question about Trumpism than Donald Trump. But when you think about some of the things that sat underneath him, the anger to some of the things we've just talked about, as well as income inequality, the economically left behind regions, the corruption in American politics, et cetera, I do wonder whether or not Donald Trump provided a blueprint for a more competent autocrat to figure out how to take power in the United States. And it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's another good question. Well, so having been down that road, it becomes less difficult to imagine that America might go down that road again. I mean, I always had a hard time in the first place believing why people who are blue-collar workers, nothing against blue-collar workers, but why would they believe that a guy who's never worked a blue-collar day in his life would be their savior? I don't understand it, right? So that's a mystery that only the American voter can answer. But can America go down that road again? Certainly. I think this election has proven not only that it's capable of doing so, but that the composition of the American people would certainly not change enough in the near term to prevent that from happening again. The folks who rallied around him is a very diverse lot, right? It's everything from, the unemployed worker in auto land in Michigan to, the very wealthy in the coasts and everything in between. And part of that is loyalty to party. Part of it is believing that a businessman is probably going to be better than a politician to run the country. Part of it is a whole host of other things that are just enigmas in American society. That all said, the path that he has blazed in that regard, the quasi-autocrat, or the democratically elected autocrat, and the record that he has achieved, and he has had plenty of successes in plenty of arenas. Some of the recent foreign policy successes, of course, vis-a-vis Israel being among them. We can't say Trump all bad, Biden all good. It's just not that way. We don't live in a black and white world, although many people in America would like to believe that. It's a mosaic. There are shades of gray, and it depends on which version of the shade of gray we're in at any given particular 4-year cycle that determines whether a guy like him can get in. If you just think about the recent political history in America, I call it schizophrenic in a way, because you go from having someone like Clinton to a Bush to an Obama to a Trump. I mean, the American population has to be schizophrenic, not only because they put them there in the first place, but then they elect them a second time, right? We go from these extremes. We fly from left to right and left to right. We just keep doing it. It's almost predictable. On that basis, Trump should have won. It hasn't been since George H.W. Bush that we've had a president that only served one term. So in that regard, that logjam appears now to have been broken.
And that George H.W. Bush term came off the back of 8 years of Ronald Reagan, so 12 years of a Republican presidency. So that's right. That's fairly rare that you get the 4 Republican years. That's interesting. I think, though, just to go back to the autocrat point around, I mean, Donald Trump is just too lazy to be, a competent autocrat, right? Just
Well,
not interested.
Let's put it this way: he outsources that element of it as well.
Sure.
I mean, it's just astonishing to me and appalling that you could have a leader like that who doesn't read anything, doesn't read his briefings, doesn't read a newspaper. I mean, my God, we've got a presidency for the last 4 years. It's been governed by sound bites from Fox News. What is that? Show me another leader anywhere in the world who's even close to that. It's astonishingly bad.
One of the things that we haven't touched on yet is race and the changing demographics in the United States that accompany that in terms of higher rates of immigration. And it has been said on occasion that I think this could be accurate, that the Republican Party in particular just hasn't picked up the baton on the changing demographics of the United States, and also the greater levels of awareness amongst white voters of racial inequality in the United States, and have gone to this very dark and divisive identity politics in both the party and obviously stoked by Donald Trump. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on the changing demographics in the United States and the politics of race, and whether or not some of the stuff that we saw, like the Confederate flags and Trump caravan that escorted the Biden bus out of Texas or whatever that was, those are kind of the last desperate gasps of people that are on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with much of what you just said. I think the problem is that we would like to believe that they are enigmas in American society. And unfortunately, they do appear to represent some elements of mainstream thought and politics. The idea that the Confederate flag could still have been flying in Southern capitals in 2020 to begin with is bad enough. The idea that the Ku Klux Klan was ever allowed to exist as a legal entity was shocking enough. The idea that racism still exists in America after everything that it went through in the 60s and all of the court battles, etc., is shocking enough. I mean, part of the reason here, of course, is that it is a democracy and there is freedom of speech, and that gives people the ability to think and do whatever they want. The Republicans are pandering to that element out there, and as we've seen, it turns out to have been a lot more than most people believed even possible in 2020, right? There's just a lot of people out there who are racists and bigots and misogynists, and there are a lot of people who want America to look like Ozzie and Harriet from the 1950s. And there are a lot of people who see absolutely nothing wrong with lynching black people in the trees. I mean, I don't know what to say about that, except that there are elements of that kind of racism and bigotry probably in every society. And I guess in that regard, we're no different. Do the Republicans appear to have paid a price for that? Well, no. I mean, they can be all of those things, and they can still get 45% of the vote. What does that tell you? I mean, one of the biggest issues I've got with what the Republican Party has turned into is that the people who are in the Republican Party, many of them, certainly the lawmakers, they don't have a spine. They don't have a moral compass. They don't seem to care about anything but winning. So offend whoever you want, do whatever you want, say whatever you want. And if it gets you to the finish line, then you're just fine. I am glad, on the other hand, to see a party in the Democrats that rejects most of that, if not all of that stuff, and is not afraid to say it. I think the Trump legacy for the Republicans is going to be long-term damage to that brand for all those spineless, lack of moral compass leaders who failed to object or reject many of the outrageous things that Trump said over the last 4 years. What is that, right? And who are the people who are voting for them? What does that say about them? Apparently, they don't care. My hope given that the diversity of America is only going to expand in the coming years, and that more and more people are likely to join the ranks of the Democrats rather than the Republicans because of everything I've just been saying, means that the Republican brand is going to be a smaller and smaller piece of the America political mosaic going forward. There are something like, I think the statistic was 28% of the public registered as Republicans. I don't know then how they end up getting 45% of the vote. I guess they attract a lot of independents in the meantime. That all said, I think the Republican brand is in deep trouble for having hitched their wagon to Trump. It was an experiment, and a lot of people held their breath, I think, at the outset, knowing that it could go very badly, and it has.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Trump, I'm wondering about the next couple of months and whether or not he pursues a kind of scorched earth transitional period. But how much damage could he do? I'm tempting fate by asking that question and wondering that. But
I guess the question is there a limit on the amount of damage he can do? So if you've got somebody who's unhinged and he's still at the helm, and he happens to be the narcissist and egotist that he is on a
very hurt,
level.
Right? Very hurt at the deepest of levels, right? Yeah, the deepest of levels.
What does somebody like that do? They lash out. Mm-hmm. They lash out. It's sort of like an animal that's put in a corner, or a child who's been rejected, or whatever you want to say. I think he's going to engage in a lot of very objectionable behavior. He's going to rile up his base. He's going to encourage people to practice civil disobedience. He's going to encourage people to break the law. He's going to continue to lie and, just dispense loads of inaccuracies and mistruths on a daily basis. That's certainly what we've had. There's no reason to believe that's going to stop. I think ultimately at that point he's going to say, if I'm going down, you're going down with me, baby. And he's going to try to cause as much damage as he possibly can.
That's disturbing and crazy.
Yeah.
What do you think happens to him in, say, a year's time? Do you think he's got so many lawsuits and legal problems that he just goes away, he goes to jail, or does he start, I don't know, Trump television or Trump, some sort of media brand that spouts out off his Trumpist beliefs? What do you think happens to him?
I can tell you what I would hope would happen. What I hope would happen is that there are something like several hundred lawsuits that are pending against him, as you mentioned. My hope is that his fortune is whittled down through legal fees with all those lawsuits. I'm not sure he's ever going to spend any time in jail, but clearly from some of the things that he's done, he should. That's just doesn't appear to be the way the American political system works. We don't really throw former leaders in jail, although I would be delighted if this one was the first. That all said, I don't think he's going quietly into the night. I think he is going to rebrand himself, if it's not through reality television. I wouldn't be surprised if he's still robust in another 4 years if he runs for president again. And there's actually no reason why he couldn't, in theory, because he didn't serve his 2 terms. So that all said, I think he's going to remain active, and I think he's going to remain vocal. And I don't think he's going to take the George W. Bush approach and just, go to his ranch in Crawford and never say anything in the political arena again. He's not capable of doing it. That's not in his DNA.
Right.
And then even if he didn't run again, one of his kids is going to run, guaranteed, right? Don Jr. being the likeliest, or maybe Ivanka, who knows? Mm-hmm. I just detest the idea of political dynasties in American politics. I had that problem with the Kennedys, for example. I certainly don't want to see it with the Trumps.
Yeah, I think many of us would not like to see it.
I mean, it could end up that Don Jr. could run, and he could end up going the way that Jeb Bush did, which is, we sort of had enough of the Bushes at this point, and doesn't matter if you've got that name. At the end of the day, he didn't get very far in his run. So let's see what happens.
Sure. Let's see what happens indeed. Well, we covered a lot of ground, and I think this may not be the last time we check in on this stuff, because it's going to be moving fairly quickly in spite of the election having concluded. So it'd be great to have you back and keep tabs on the shifting sands, because, I have listeners in the United States, but also around the world. And like everyone who's a non-American, first of all, we're fascinated by the United States and what goes on, but also because it impacts the rest of the world so much.
Yeah, it does. And I hope we remain as consequential as we used to be. Certainly, China is becoming more consequential, and America finally has a peer in the global arena. That being the case, we're going to have to be at the top of our game going forward on that basis alone. I just hope that people don't give up hope on America. I mean, there's a lot of Americans who are about to give up hope on America, but let's hope that we can right the ship now that Biden is at the helm. We're going to be at the helm shortly. Let's hope that this sad chapter in American political history is just that, a sad chapter, and never repeated again.
Daniel, this was fantastic as always. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure indeed, Ben. You have a good time in Canada.
Thank you. Bye for now. All right, I hope you guys found that insightful. Give Daniel a follow, and if you enjoyed this, please give the episode a share, depending on when you've listened to it. It may be the very first, very detailed pieces of analysis about the US election results out there, so do give it a share, as others would be interested in it as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe and give us a positive review wherever you get your podcasts. That is it for now. We will be back soon. Until then, and as always, don't forget, risk is life.